Is Mehran Kamrava. I am the director of the Iranian Studies Unit here at the Arab Center for Research and Policy Studies, and I'm also a professor of government at Georgetown University in Qatar. It is a pleasure and a delight to welcome all of you to the Arab Center to hear Dr. Mahjoub Zowairi. I'll introduce our speaker in a minute, but let me tell you why we're all here. We're here because of the major developments that have transpired in Iran since the end of December. As you know, there have been major developments in Iran, both domestically as well as regionally and internationally. In many ways, what we're seeing in Iran is an unprecedented series of events and developments. Protests have become a regular feature of the Iranian political landscape since the late 1980s. But this round of protests were different when they started in late December because of their intensity, scale, and the fact that relatively quickly they became very violent. And also they're different in their massive repressive response of the state, with something in the magnitude of thousands of people that were killed. And the repercussions of what transpired in December and January are still continuing. In some ways, I think we can tell that Iran is at a fork. Either it will, the state will go the way of the former Soviet Union in terms of imploding, and the atrophy of institutions will result in major institutional change, or it might go the way of China after Tiananmen Square. And so I think it's important for us to see how developments unfold both domestically and internationally. To help us think through some of these important issues, I cannot think of anyone better suited than my friend and colleague, Dr. Mahjoub Zowairi. Dr. Zowairi is professor of contemporary politics and history of the Middle East with a focus on Iran and the Gulf region. He's a visiting professor of politics and international relations here at the Doha Institute for Graduate Studies, and he is also an editor at the Encyclopedia Arabica, which is being prepared and published by the Arab Center for Research and Policy Studies. Mahjoub was a professor of Gulf Studies, a professor at the Gulf Studies Center from 2018 to 2025 at the University of Qatar, where he also served as director of the Gulf Studies from 2018 to 2024. Previously, he was head of the Humanities Department from 2011 to 2017. Prior to joining Qatar University in 2010, Professor Zowairi was a senior researcher in Middle East politics and Iran at the Center for Strategic Studies at the University of Jordan. From March of 2003 to December of 2006, he was a research fellow and then director at the Center for Iranian Studies in the Institute for Middle Eastern and Islamic Studies at Durham University. He has more than 100 publications. If I were to go through that, we'd be here for the entire month of Ramadan. So I will not go through Mahjoub's many publications. But a terrifically placed scholar and intellectual to help us guide through some of the issues. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Mahjoub Zowairi.
Assalamu alaikum jami'an wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you, Mehran, for the introduction. سعيد بوجودي معاكم اليوم وشكرا على الدعوة الكريمة.
And thank you for the kind invitation. What I will present will be just preliminary notes and remarks, and it will pertain to many years of the hard labor that the Islamic Revolution went through in Iran. And to complement what my colleague and friend Mehran has said, I propose a title for this lecture to be The New Birth of the Islamic Republic of Iran, because it's always used to come out of one stage to another, which is more lively. This is a process. This is not an event which will end at a certain hour or at a particular juncture. For me, there are three main things in Iran that should be mentioned. The spiritual puritanism, survivability, and the desire to survive and continue. These are like three births. Iran went through two births apart from the period where there was a revolution and an Islamic Republic. After 3 months, Iran started what I call the first birth, Jihadi Sazandigi in Persian, which is the jihad of building the big developmental project focused on a very simple idea, and that is to go to the peripheries and the marginalized people to bring them and win them over to the camp of the state and the revolution. This was important. When the revolution started through an alliance of clerics and intellectuals from the left, and the Iran-Iraq war ended that alliance in favor of the clerics. But this project went to the peripheries to bring the middle class, the engineers, the doctors. They came to Tehran. They settled in South Tehran. Tehran, before the revolution, was the population was in the region of 10 million. After the revolution, it jumped to 13, 14 million as compared to the pre-revolution. This birth, if I'm to describe it, this means the cohesion of the regime and tight control of the clerics and religious leaders on the state and all its functions. This continued from the early 90s to 2010. In this period, the regime survived the Iran-Iraq war and succeeded in Islamization of the society regarding imposing the veil, the hijab, through the constitution, Islamization of social sciences, universities, etc., etc. Then, so far as foreign policy is concerned, the regime apologized for exporting revolution and presented itself as a defender of the mustad'afin, or the oppressed or the weak people in the world. This was important because the charisma of Ayatollah Khamenei was united the regime, and this entire system of the regime. This was Ayatollah Khomeini, and he united the people around the regime. But the same period produced a new supreme leader who was less charismatic than the first leader, and in this birth, and 36 years now, he is running the affairs of the republic, and 6 presidents have gone through the periods of different tenets. And then there was a time when conservatism was the prevalent order. Then there was a more leftist than Ahmadinejad, than Hassan Rouhani, which is less leftist maybe, but a bit moderate. In this period, the system has had a tremendous amount of ability to adapt, to renew itself, to renew its discourse, its narrative, and continued its narrative with the outside world in the same vein, building its narrative on a certain degree of certainty, no changes, and the way things are going serves the regime, its alliances with the Syrian regime, its alliances with West Asia, and even in Latin America, and even in Africa in that period. What's important about this period that Iran started entering into a new phase of a challenge in August 2002, and that is to do with the nuclear program. Iran, for the first time, found itself, it has to come up with responses and answers before the world, and if it doesn't, there will be repercussions and consequences, not on the country but on the regime itself. So, in the first birth, the regime managed to adapt to the changes and went through a period of negotiations until the nuclear deal in 2015. At that time, there was a red line in Iran. Iran thought it can impose everything in the region, and it went from negotiations with the three countries, then with the Americans, the 5+1, and Iran's regional influence was the most important item on the agenda. In this period, Iran managed to present itself as a stable, united, solid, cohesive regime and can impose its will and does not care less about anything else. And this regime was certain that the economic situation was good, and its interaction with the economic pressures was not that yet. It all started, and all the different resolutions, all the different packages of the major sanctions was started with in Ahmadinejad's era that the Security Council imposed on Iran. The regime could say at that time, and I was a witness, I lived in Iran between October 1997 and May 2002. Yes, everything was solid and cohesive in Iran. There were pressures, but the economy was strong, the social order was one. Then Iran participated in initiatives like the Dialogue of Civilizations. The regime at that time did not care about the American challenge. The Europeans used to say in their private meetings that Iran is different. We cannot talk about Iran similarly to what we used to say about Iraq. When they sent teams of the CIA to minority areas in Iran, they went back saying that minorities cannot be used against the regime, and some of these reports were published or made public. In this period of the jihad of reconstruction, the regime wanted to build a political class of the marginalized to rely on militarily and in the bureaucracy, and they will be the ones who will lift the regime and carry it. Sangar Sazan Bi Sangar, as they used to say, that there are engineers and others who are building the country in this period, and despite an air of optimism and despite the ability to move from one president to other with all the discussion of the Shura Council, in 2009 this was ended in a bloody way in so-called the Iranian Spring, when the Iranians criticized the results of the election of Ahmadinejad. Here we can say that some uncertainty started to find its way. The economy in 2007 or around that, the sanctions started having an impact, and people started feeling it when it comes to traveling or money exchanges. They had problems. Also, the regime's response to demonstrations caused a certain amount of disgruntlement amongst the population. This period, the Iranians woke up to an alarm call saying that there is something is happening in the regime and something unacceptable in its relationship with the people that should not be tolerated. The Iranians hated to see what is happening in their towns and cities, similar to what happened in Iraq. And there was the media, state media, also broadcast reports to say, look at your neighboring countries, this car bombs, etc. So people had some sort of an awareness that is important to maintain the stability and do not sacrifice that. This period of yaqeen or certainty was followed by a period of uncertainty. The second phase of the first birth was from 2010 to 2018. 8 years, and this period is of the utmost importance to understand what's happening in Iran now and is dealing with the United States. What happened in Iran, and what was the step that warned Iran that there is something dangerous or a threat? And the supreme leader on the 18th of October 2018 made a declaration. What happened in this period? It was the Arab Spring, which was a big shock to Iran. The status quo in the region served the feeling of certainty and the birth of the regime. It has become established. It's able to deal with economic pressures. When the regime, or the region, went through this upheaval and the collapse of certain regimes, was a shock to the Iranian revolution. They had to correct their position. In Egypt and Tunisia, they called it an extension of the Islamic Revolution. In Syria, they called it American Islam or American agents in action. Here, in one part, they considered it an Islamic reawakening. In other countries, they called it American hegemony, Turkish hegemony. Iran was banking on its region and its relations with the region, and its support of the Palestinian cause is a real investment, because this created a popular grassroots movement and support. So when they were discussing anything, they used to repeat that the Arab Spring was an unpleasant event, and maybe in the Arab Center we wrote about this, and how is the Iranian foreign policy was put through a severe test, which was something Iran never liked or wanted. This test never stopped. In 2011, the words that started talking about Arab Spring. Then after that, there was calls by the Syrian regime to Iran to help Syria. After 2-3 years, we saw the first Iranian military intervention in Syria since the Iran-Iraq war. This was a seismic development. This is the first time the regime felt that there is an outside threat to it. But the regime continued thinking that it's still in charge and in control, and they have strong cards up their sleeve, and they can run the scene in a different way. The dynamics that the Arab Spring created, in my opinion, it was one of the most important dynamics to push the Iranians towards negotiating with the Europeans. The regime change in many countries made Iranians think, should we deal with the Europeans in a different way than the Americans or negotiate for the sake of negotiations? This has ended up in the summer of 2015 when an agreement. What happened in these 5 years? Iran used to negotiate with the big ones to consolidate its image in the region and to benefit from the region's roles and reactions to improve its negotiation position for the deal. The regime thought that it went out after the 2015 deal that it can start thinking of leaving the sanctions regime or liberating itself from it. And until May 2018, or 27 months or thereabouts, the agreement was in implementation. Iran thought it will get rid of the sanctions, but Trump did not help them. In May, he departed from the agreement and reimposed the sanctions. So the supreme leader, after 2 months, on the 40th anniversary of the Islamic Revolution, started talking about the second birth, in my opinion. And according to Khamenei's speech, this birth focuses on a basic idea that there is achievement, accomplishments in the development and the building, and the generation which lifted the regime is advanced now, and we must go back to the youth and bridge the gap between the different generations of the revolution. This was an important speech. After 2002, there was a problem. There was like older generations leading the country, and the younger generations felt left out, and there was a gap between the two. And something worth mentioning, that Khamenei used the 40th anniversary of the revolution reciting the Quran, a Quranic verse that when a prophet said that now that I am 40 years of age, please God grant me success and wisdom, and etc., mentioning the 40th anniversary of the revolution. Khamenei here spoke about 2 strategies. First, Khalis Sazi, or cleansing or purification, Khudi and Nakhudi. That's dividing people to the Khudi who are with the regime, Nakhudi who are not with the regime. Maybe they were, but they changed, whatever. This division I remember since the days of the reform, like you are with us or against us, basically. And what Khamenei meant by this is that the revolution should move into the second step or stage by purifying itself of all the Nakhudis, or the people who do not belong to the revolution. This made people a bit concerned. People who think that they worked for years in service of the revolution, now they are being doubted. So this was a cause for concern. And also there was the economy of resistance, اقتصادي مقاومتي, and it says if the sanctions are to continue, then we must change our economy and adapt it to the situation. I think this continues until now, and the regime since 2018 started sensing that there is another threat, and that situation did not bring certainty to the regime. On the contrary, more uncertainty as the time passes. The region's situation has changed, the generations inside Iran has changed, and the international order has lost its period of conciliation with Iran. There was a lot of positivity towards Iran before, but after America's withdrawal from the 2015 agreement, even the Europeans started talking in a different sense towards Iran, more negative one, and this has really caused the Iranian security apparatus and the state to be going through some uncertainty.
So, practically speaking, what has happened in Iran? First, the economic situation, it's in the worst form possible. And this is not only limited to the economy. Since 2018, what has happened in Iran? So, Qasem Soleimani was assassinated in 2018. And after that, the second shock happened. I talked about the first shock in the first birth was the Arab Spring. The second shock was the Aqsa deluge or the Aqsa flood. So those who look into the situation after the 7th of October 2023, and if they listen to the statements by Amir Abdullahian, they will see a sense of not necessarily things being clear. So there is a sense where the situation seems to be not clear. So they thought, why you don't talk about the muqawama or the resistance? That is why they resorted to a kind of a middle ground solution. So they said that we have to try to keep the status quo as it is, and for the Palestinians to be able to practice their rights and enjoy their rights. So the situation became not very clear, and they started handling a number of diplomatic meetings in Doha, in Riyadh, and in the Emirates, and they kept on talking about the situation, that it should stay as it is. And practically speaking, since then, Iran tried to dissociate itself from the situation. The Wall Street Journal, through a number of correspondents, they said that there was a meeting that was held between Yahya al-Sinwar and Iranians in Beirut, and it was proven afterwards that this was not true. So Iran was supposed to be invited to the scene for them to be demonized and also brought into this battle that happened in the aftermath of the 23rd of the 7th of October. So the situation, for the first time, Iran found itself in a direct military confrontation with Israel. So Netanyahu on the 8th of October said that Iran is part of what is happening and that it is going to be targeted at some point in time. And he started with Hezbollah, and after that they bombarded the consulate in Syria, and Syria, because of Iran, it was targeted, and more than 1,350 times, and they have targeted everything, factories and investments that are thought to belong to Iran. All of them were targeted, and the people of Syria know that. And Iran, for Israel, was an easy target, but Iran did not carry out any big reactions because they thought that their existence and presence is linked to the regime. That is why they try to dissociate themselves and say that they do not have a real presence in Syria. And after that, the consulate was targeted, and this had led to the war that took place in 2025. So this war, the war of 2025, what are the repercussions when it comes to the second birth? So first, this has shown that military might, the Iranian military might that is known to people, is not as it was thought, and that there was a great deal of infiltration that happened in the first phase, and also when it comes to their defense system. But what is even worse for Iran in this second birth that still continues, and this phase, the phase of this second birth, and the ending point is going to be the end or the outcome of the negotiations and what is going to happen between both the US and Iran. Is this going to lead to a war erupting in the region, or is it going to lead to an agreement, and therefore this is going to lead to the third birth of the Republic? In December 2024, it was announced that the hegemony of Iran had come to an end because all the hegemony was orchestrated and navigated through Damascus. So this was the death certificate of this hegemony, and they were betting for the situation to go back to what it used to be, but it was not as they expected. And now, when the attack was carried out by the Israelis, this had led to the end of the idea of deterrence, and new questions have appeared when it comes to the defense capabilities and also the security infiltration, and also the great investments in the nuclear program was targeted in 3 hours. So here we see a new question that was posed. So what was invested on and defended by the regime? So they have lost their hegemony in the region. The allies have started posing important questions, what is happening? And therefore we have another thing, which is the nuclear program. All of this happened in light of this nuclear program, and also the situation from an economic perspective and also political perspective, this situation that happened. So what we see is that the regime opted for options far from any confrontation, because the second birth is existential. We're talking about a regime that is 47 years old. And when we talk about the institutions that have not been renewed by the regime, these are a continuation of the previous regime. And of course, there is a lack of real allies. China and Russia, up to now, have not given Iran things that would enable the regime to stand on its feet or to remain standing on its feet. So they were wondering how they invested in their relationship with these two countries, and as a result of that, they were not able to get any real support. These two countries have not used the right of veto vis-a-vis the different series of sanctions that were imposed on Iran. So this led to a fourth question, the allies. So what is the benefit of having all these alliances with these countries? The second birth in the Republic of Iran, the Islamic Republic of Iran, and the continuation of this phase is betting on 3 main components. So the ability to reach an agreement with the US without resorting to a military option. The second point, in light of the use of international law and the United Nations, the main confrontation of Iran is going to be with Washington. The West is just a bystander. So it just watches what is happening and clapping for the US. So I think there's going to be a military confrontation. And the third point, which is the most important one, regionally speaking, Iran, for the first time, it sees that there are those who defend it and defend the existence of the Islamic Republic. So many talked about the region, the neighboring countries as not being important to Iran, but now the neighboring countries are important, and they were able to postpone the war for at least 4 weeks, and perhaps this can lead to a limited military confrontation or a limited war. So that is why Iran should focus on its neighboring countries more than it focuses on anything else. And this is what Rouhani and Khatami used to say. They used to say that this relationship is very important indeed. The relationship with the West is very important indeed in order to play a role. شكرا جزيلا.
The tour de force of how we got to where we are I'll open it up to questions in a minute. But you ended with a discussion of Iran's focus on neighboring countries. And we know that Turkey, Qatar, and Saudi Arabia in particular have been very active in trying to reduce tensions between Iran and the United States. But notably absent has been the United Arab Emirates. That the UAE, although they have said they will not let their airspace be used on an attack on Iran, but they haven't really been active in trying to reduce tensions between Iran and the United States. To what do you attribute that different approach that the UAE has taken in relation to Iran as compared to Qatar or Saudi Arabia and Turkey?
I think the major point here is about perception, how the United States perceive countries and their role in building peace. I think the United States does look at Qatar, Turkey, with the experience of Gaza in particular, basically, as a different experience and as trustworthy, basically. I think that itself makes the United States rely on them and listen to them. I think what they have done in the last 4 weeks, and I think the close relation between Trump and Erdogan itself also influential. I think the information they were conveying to the Americans, it's also trustworthy to the Americans, and that itself helped a lot. I'm not sure that in the context of what happened now with the Emirati rule, a role in different places can help the United States to accept what the Emiratis are saying.
Right, so we shouldn't take that as an indication that the UAE welcomes a clash between Iran and the US, particularly in light of their ejection from Yemen.
I don't think so. They want any kind of military action. The Emiratis always hate the military action because they know that the implication will be tough on their economy and their stability. And that's something they always try to defend in the last confrontation between the United States and Iran.
Perfect. Thank you. Floor is open if anyone has any questions. Mahjoub has kindly agreed to answer some questions if anyone has questions. Go ahead, gentlemen. There's a mic coming.
الله يعطيك العافية دكتور محجوب على هذه المحاضرة. دكتور أنا بس في يعني
I have a question. In the war that happened in 2025, Iran was totally infiltrated from a security perspective. And as a result of that, there have been a number of scenes that show that the Mossad were able to infiltrate. And a month after the war, after the 12-day war, a number of security and military officials and politicians, they said that we have relocated our and remobilized our military. Is it possible during this very short period of time, comparing the period where they were exposed after 12 days, they were able and ready to start their deterrence? إذا دعونا نأخذ بضعة أسئلة أخرى إن سمحتم. شكرا جدا.
Mahjoub al-Zawiri for your analysis of the different discourse in the foreign policy of Islamic Republic of Iran, namely from the 2000 until today. As a matter of fact, we think that maybe the new birth of Islamic Republic of Iran that are chosen by Your Excellency as the one title for this panel, I think it is my recommendation that instead of the new birth, maybe this is the one, the tactic, in the one long-term perspective of our strategy of Islamic Republic of Iran after the 1979 till today. Personally, I think the long-term perspective strategy of Iran after 1979 till today is never changed. But maybe the tactic in every period of time is changed. My question is that, first of all, thank you so much for your explanation and for detailed information regarding analysis of this period. My question is that, in your opinion, I don't want to that attributed all of this problem for economic problem to the sanction or unilateral coercive measure, but I would like to ask you that in an analysis, how do you see the role of this sanction or role of this UCM for severe of economic situation in Iran? Thank you so much.
Thank you. Your Excellency.
As we discussed the three phases, and do you attribute that to the dynamism of the revolution, that it can evolve, or is it fossilized and in survival mode? What do you think is the core that that motivates this changes? And the second part of my question is, after the third phase, what would be the fourth phase for survival and for destruction? Thank you.
Let's take one more in this round and we'll come back to the other round. Go ahead, Your Excellency. Yes. And we'll come back.
Good afternoon. I am Mohammed Kene. I am the ambassador of Liberia in Qatar. Let me use this opportunity to say many thanks for the invite, and a big thank you to Prof. Zweri for the beautiful expose he just made. My question here is, after following what happened since the last 18 months, Prof, what do you think should the regime right now in Tehran, what do you think they should do to normalize relations with the neighbors, and especially have a role to play within the United Nations in order to lift these sanctions? Thank you.
Thank you. Matthew will answer these questions. So, His Excellency, the Ambassador of Liberia, I just want to add to his question, because he talked about what would Iran do. Now, we know that during the 12-day war, the Chancellor of Germany came out and said, Israel is doing the dirty job we all want to do. And that's the Chancellor of Germany, not some rogue state. Well, I guess after Germany's support for the genocide, maybe it is a rogue state. But what would Iran do to be able to reintegrate itself, if at all, given the massive international consensus that we're witnessing against Iran today?
قبل حوالي شهرين كان عندي فرصة.
I had the opportunity to meet His Excellency, the Vice President of Iran, with two other colleagues here in Qatar. And I asked him the following question: what happened to you in the first day? So you are talking about the Satan, the biggest Satan, Israel, and so on and so forth. How did it happen? And he said the following. He said the main idea that we all agree on is that there is a high level of infiltration and also a lack of adequate security assessment of the situation. And he said that the attack started on 3:15 in the morning, and we were able to convene our first governmental meeting at 5:30 in the morning. We thought that we succeeded as a regime to defeat Israel, because they thought that the attack was supposed to create a certain tremor within the regime that would contribute to the toppling of the regime. When we were able to convene the meeting at 5:30 in the morning with all members, this was an announcement of victory. All of us, and he said, all of us were furious, and this is the exact word that he said. We were attending the meeting and had many, many questions. And when we looked for the answers to those questions, the answer was amongst those who were killed. All those who were killed had the answers to the questions that we posed. And we felt a bigger tremor. So none of the persons present had the answers. Those who had the answers, all of them were killed. So in keeping with these statements and also the security assessments that were conducted, it is expected that, it is believed that Iran since then reevaluated, rearranged its security measures, including the repositioning and the remobilization. And perhaps they got some pieces of advice as to how they would conduct that from a military perspective. So the security institutions, if you look at their statements, they have a certain level of trust and confidence because there was a level of surprise. But now this is not the situation because everybody talks about an imminent war. So the strategy of the Islamic Republic is to avoid the war, irrespective of all the preparations that are taking place. War, irrespective of how simple it is going to be a great loss because their adversary wants the head of the regime. They want to topple the regime. And they want to make the regime enter into a situation where eventually it will fall. So we have a great deal of uncertainty in the region, and this is going to increase. So the region is going to face more wars and also more Israeli infiltration in the region within the same context. So avoiding the war can lead me to another idea. So what are they going to give in the negotiations in order to avoid the war? So they're talking about the negotiations is going to lead to lifting sanctions, and any concessions should make the United States of America ready to lift these sanctions. I think the options that Iran has, these options are very limited, taking into account this international mobilization. The United Nations is not helping Iran. It is hijacked. We're facing a huge or the worst situation ever when it comes to international law or the institution of the United Nations. I think that Iran should reinstate its relationship with the allies and also to reposition the region. The repositioning of the region can limit the military attack and not fall into a kind of a comprehensive war. So governments in the region do not want a conflict in the region. This is in keeping with the Iranian view. And if Iran is ready to make concessions, to cooperate, to come up with alternatives that can make the president not resort to war. But this is not the war of America. This is the war of Israel. The coming war is not an American war. Trump in 2018 was ready to reach or to conclude a deal with the Iranians. And I said that. There was an interview with Larijani. I said, had this happened in 2018, perhaps Iran would have been in a better situation than it is today. We today are facing Netanyahu, who considers Iran part of his fronts. And Iran should understand this very well. And if they want to stop Israel from doing that, I think they have to make concessions to the American president in a way or another in order to avoid this war. So the revolutionary discourse is still taking place. On the 14th anniversary of the revolution, the supreme leader talked about the same discourse, but we have also national interests that are taken into account. And the discourse is still clear when it comes to the revolutionary perspective, and the values of the revolution were very much reflected in the speech. شكرا جزيلا. لقد دهمنا الوقت لكن هنا
Hands up, three, and I want to call on them. Okay. So I ask if both the questions and the answers could be kept briefly, so we can keep to time. Yes, and then the gentleman behind.
Ashraf Siddiqui. Mr. Majub, what are those? What Iran can offer, in your views?
Perfect, thank you. If you can just pass the mic to the gentleman. Yeah, thank you.
Bismillah, salat salam wa
the most compassionate, the most merciful, dear professors, distinguished guests, may the peace of God be upon you all. Dr. Rashid Bellaqra from the University of Algeria. At the outset, I would like to gather as much valor as I can to pose this question. I have a small introduction and after that and a question. I think that the Western system, it tries to does not try to put an end to Iran, but as it happened prior to 2003 with Iraq, the Western powers, they try to dwarf Iran because the functional role of Iran in the region is very clear. The role of Iran in different Arab countries. So that is why, and despite this historic reconciliation between Iran and Saudi Arabia, but for the West, they prefer a weaker Iran than not having Iran at all. That is why we can see some issues between different Western powers, but they want at the same time Iran to continue with its role. And this is going to be reflected in the archives in the future because there have been a number of hidden agreements that were concluded, and this is going to be shocking to so many Arab nations. And here I remember the book that was issued about the revolution and the alliance that was concluded between the Shah, Israel, and the US. So there is something else that I would like to say. Do you think that statements, unofficial statements by a commander saying that Iran occupies 5 states in the region, and this is not in contradiction with the policies of Iran, and taking into account, of course, the reconciliation that Iran aims to achieve in the region as well. السؤال الأخير. شكرا جزيلا.
Mohsen Soldus from Liverpool University, China. You talked about what happened in Iran during the second phase, the consolidation of power, insiders, outsiders. I wanted to have your views about what was at the same time happening in Iran's regional policy, because you pointed to Iran's outreach in the region. At the same time, in 2003, we had Qasem Soleimani, the Quds Force IRGC commander, who was reaching out to Americans despite the consolidation of power between insiders, outsiders, Khodi and Ghair Khodi in Iran. So at the same time that Khamenei was consolidating his own grip on power, he was trying to some sort of reconcile with Americans in terms of regional policy. In Afghanistan, it was Iran cooperating with the US to remove the Taliban from power after September 11. 2003, in Iraq, again, it was Qasem Soleimani who approached Americans to perhaps expand cooperation between Iran and the US. So there was a point of time that these exogenous issues shaped Iran's policy in the region. When Iran wanted to approach major powers to consolidate its power, or perhaps shape its regional policy in a different way. So I wanted to have your views on that. Thank you.
Quickly. Yes, sorry.
أنا باعتقادي إنه
I think that Iran's options are very, very limited when it comes to the nuclear deal. They can give as much that they give in 2015, but when it comes to the ballistic missiles, I think that Iran is recalling the Iraqi situation, and they do not want a repetition of the same situation, because if they're drawn into this square, they're going to start talking about other concessions. So that is why the regional policy of Iran since 2003 was very important indeed in order to enter into dialogue with the US and even with Taliban, as you have mentioned. And this was part of the new or the first birth because it was very important to tell the world and the region that they are dealing with the big ones. This happened with prior to Taliban and the war on terror when it comes to the western part of Iraq. So everybody knew that the American aircrafts were targeting the western part of Iraq. So this was part of the rehabilitation and renewal of relationship with the West in order to alleviate the pressure relevant to the nuclear program. But the Americans do not have any friends. They do not. Just one observation. The students here, the master students, as my colleague has said, Dr. Mahran, I am writing in the Arab Encyclopedia. Those who can write and would like to train with me and write, they can send me an email. There's an opportunity to participate in a large project in the Arab Encyclopedia, and this is also going to help you to get to know more about Iran and also to enhance your perspective, your knowledge, if you're knowledgeable in history, geography, and we can prepare a large team of researchers who can work on this particular topic with regard to Iran.
Very much, really appreciate it. This has been absolutely fantastic. As you can imagine, Iran and issues related to Iran will be with us. And right here in front of all these people, I'm going to extract a promise from you to come back and help us think through some of these issues again. Please join me in thanking Mahjoub Zuwairi, and my sincere thanks to you all. Thank you.